Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. Climate alarmism is largely based on appeals to authority. 10 years ago, Texas was having a very bad heat wave and drought, and Governor Rick Perry said this: "If you're in the farming business, you're going to have good years, you're going to have bad years. It's just our bad year coming. We've had some awful good ones back in, and we'll be fine. And as my dad says, it'll rain. It always does."
If you're in the farming business, you're going to have good years, you're going to have bad years. It's just our bad year coming up. We've had some awful good ones back in, and we'll be fine.
Yep.
As my dad says, it'll rain. It always does.
Yeah.
Governor Perry's rather obvious wisdom outraged Texas climate scientists, and Texas A&M climate scientist Andrew Dessler angrily responded with this statement: "There are dozens of credible atmospheric scientists in Texas at institutions like Rice, UT, and Texas A&M, and I can confidently say that none agree with Governor Perry's views on the science of climate change. This is a particularly unfortunate situation given the hellish drought that Texas is now experiencing." And ABC News said, "With no end in sight for Texas drought, every farmer in the world will be affected by climate change." I got my master's degree at Rice University, so I would have to agree with Andrew Dessler's appeal to authority that Rice grads are always correct. Texas Aggies, not so much though. The Texas state climatologist John Nielsen Gammon is an Aggie, and he predicted that the 2011 drought could last until 2020. And Aggie Andrew Dessler told the Houston Chronicle, "Get used to the heat. The weather of the 21st century will be very much like the hot and dry weather of 2011. Let's look now how the forecasts of dozens of credible climate scientists did in Texas. Texas has been getting wetter since the 19th century, and since those forecasts were made 10 years ago, Texas has had their wettest years on record. Dozens of leading climate academics had no clue what they were talking about and got their forecasts exactly backwards. Texas government listened to the scientists and paid a high price for it last week. 2 weeks ago, USA Today was bragging that up to 2/3 of Texas energy output in 2020 was produced by wind power. And then the windmills froze up, dozens of people froze to death, and USA Today suddenly changed their story. Green energy isn't reliable, global warming isn't keeping anybody warm, and Texas academics have no clue what they're talking about. Now let's go back and look at the ABC News claim from 10 years ago. Based on a drought in Texas, they concluded that every farmer in the world will be affected by climate change. Let's see how that forecast did. Crop yields around the world have skyrocketed as carbon dioxide has increased over the last 60 years. Corn yields in the United States are up by a factor of 5 over the last century. Cereal yields in Chile have skyrocketed over the last 40 years. Around the world, hunger has declined sharply over the last 30 years. NASA reports that the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is making Earth much greener. This seems to be helping farmers out quite a bit. But never mind the fact that he was completely wrong 10 years ago and that Texas has had their wettest years on record over the past decade, the Texas state climatologist is right back at it again. Aggie John Nielsen Gammon is now predicting that Texas will soon face the driest conditions of the last 1,000 years, in his work supported by the National Science Foundation. These climate scientists have no clue what they're talking about, and they never did. They say now that global warming is going to ruin the world's food supply, and 45 years ago they said that global cooling was going to ruin the world's food supply. June 22, 1976, a CIA report supporting the global cooling thesis was released last month. It warned that world food supplies could be threatened if the cooling trend continued. The stability of most nations is based on a dependable source of food, but this stability will not be possible under the new climate era. The report said the politics of food will become the central issue of every government. The U.S. government has gotten into a lot of trouble because they listen to clueless climate scientists, but other countries are taking a different path. Unlike the United States, the Mexican government has abandoned the climate scam and is now betting big on coal. Also, unlike the United States, Mexico requires voter ID so that they can have legitimate elections. And China is building new coal-fired power plants like crazy because they want to keep the lights on for their people. China is building new coal-fired power plants 3 times faster than the rest of the world combined. They're not falling for the dozens of credible climate scientists scam. But Toto's dad is a Rice University graduate, so you should listen to him. You can visit Toto and Kyrie on the web at realclimatescience.com.